The last trackers of old kinship, a mythic history, or as we prefer to coin it, an ethnomythopoeia. In the years when the American land broke, when the soil blew away and the banks closed and the lines of hungry men went nowhere, something old began to die. It had no monument. No one marked its passing. It was the older kinship, not a word, not a movement, a way of living that had no name because it needed none. You were not only yourself. You did not own what you had been given alone. You were only the next one trusted to carry it. The land was not yours. The community was not yours. You belonged to them, and that belonging asked something of you every day of your life. When the gray years wore that away, the hunger that remained was enormous, and into that hunger rode Bonnie and Clyde. Their names were Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. They were young. They moved fast. They robbed banks and shot lawmen and drove stolen cars as though consequences did not apply to them. And they did it, all of it. They did all of it together, the two of them, always the two of them, which was the part that mattered most to the people watching from the roadside. The people who had lost everything cheered for them. And why wouldn't they? Here were two people burning brightly through a world that had gone gray. They seemed free, they seemed fearless, and they asked nothing in return. No obligation, no sacrifice, no loyalty to anything older than themselves. Only that you watch, only that you feel for a moment that someone was burning on your behalf. That feeling, that is what the new kinship offered. Not belonging, the feeling of belonging, not kin, but the performance of it. People cut their photographs from newspapers and kept them in coat pockets. They named their children after them. They left food at roadsides and kept silent when the law came asking. The dispossessed loved Bonnie and Clyde the way the starving love a fire that gives no warmth. For the light of it, for the proof that something still burned, for the few moments it held the dark back. And Bonnie and Clyde received that love and grew larger inside it. They began to believe that the adoration of the crowd was a form of protection, that to be the story of a suffering people was to be untouchable. The myth of themselves entered them, and they could no longer see beyond it. This is what the new kinship always does. It feeds on the hunger of others while calling that hunger devotion. It takes the love of the struggling and turns it back on itself. It gives back only its reflection, bright, dazzling, and entirely concerned with itself. The crowd was not their kin. The crowd was their audience. Frank Hamer was 60 years old. He'd been shot 17 times across a life spent in service, not to his own name, not to his own glory, but to the community that had formed him. He rode toward trouble when others rode away. He did what was needed and then stopped. He did not ask to be remembered for it. That was not what the work was for. Now he had been put out to pasture. The modern world had moved on to men who were easier to photograph, easier to quote, easier to place inside a story that newspapers could sell. Men like Hamer were remnants, too plain, too blunt, formed by an older apprenticeship that had no interest in being admired. Manny Galt was quieter. steadier. He had ridden with Hamer before, and he would ride with him again. Not because anyone asked him to explain himself, because that is what you did. That was the old kinship. That's the way the old kinship looked between men. No ceremony, no negotiation, no calculation of personal cost, just showing up. They were called back not because anyone wanted them. They were called back because no one else remembered how. This is what the old kinship asked of a man. Not that he be celebrated, not that he be loved by strangers, not that his name or his face be kept for people to admire at a safe distance. It asked that he show up when he was needed, that he do the work no one else could do, that he carried the obligation without complaint, put it down when it was finished, and returned to his life asking nothing more. Hamer had been shot 17 times in that service. He had not stopped. He had not made a monument of his wounds or turned his survival into a story worth selling. He had simply continued. That is what honor looks like when it's real. It is not loud. It is not beautiful. It does not need your applause to remain true. It gives more than it gets every time and considers that the correct arrangement is that exact way. They tracked Bonnie and Clyde for months. There was no glory in it. They moved through a country that loved the quarry, that kept their secrets, left food for them, remembered nothing when the law came asking. Almost every door that closed politely, almost every county that looked the other way. The myth of Bonnie and Clyde was armor. It was formidable. But Hamer and Galt did not try to fight the myth. They did not argue with the story or try to make a better one. They had no gift for performance and no interest in acquiring it. They simply moved patiently, steadily, failing and returning to their work, sleeping in the car, arguing quietly about which road, trails going cold, starting over. No one photographed them doing this. No one kept their pictures. No one prayed for them at kitchen tables. The myth flowed entirely toward the bright pair, Bonnie and Clyde, burning and consuming everything offered to them. The old trackers followed in silence behind it, carrying nothing but the oldest instruction. Find them. Do what is needed. Come home. On the morning of May 23, 1934, Frank Hamer and Manny Galt were waiting on a rural road through a pine thicket in Louisiana. 4 other lawmen were with them. They were simply waiting there when Bonnie and Clyde arrived. There was no announcement, no final confrontation, no last words worth putting in a story. 130 rounds fired in under 20 seconds, and then silence. And the pine trees, and the road that looked like any other road. What happened after is itself a testament. The bodies of Bonnie and Clyde were mobbed. Thousands came. People tore at the bullet-riddled car for souvenirs. Someone tried to cut off Clyde's trigger finger. Someone else tried to cut off his ear. The crowd wept and pushed and carried pieces of that story away with them, as though they were relics of something sacred. This is what the new kinship produces at its end. not grief for a person, grief for a performance, not mourning for kin, mourning for a mirror that has gone dark. The crowd had never truly known Bonnie and Clyde. They had known the story of them, and the story from the very beginning had been about itself. The dispossessed who had prayed for them, fed them, protected them, and received nothing in return that lasted. Bonnie and Clyde had never owed them anything, and they had never pretended otherwise. The new kinship had taken their love and given it back only the feeling of it. When it ended, they were left with nothing. Afterwards, Frank Hamer went home. Manny Galt went home. There was no parade, no ceremony, no crowd gathered to touch the car that had driven or weep at the sight of them. The newspapers that had filled their pages for years with the story of Bonnie and Clyde wrote almost nothing about the men who had ended it. What little they wrote did not last. Hamer returned to his life, the same life he had left when he was called, the same obligations, the same land, the same people had always been his. He had given what was asked. He had done what no one else remembered how to do, and when it was finished, he put it down, not as a trophy, not as a story worth selling, just a thing that had been done. That is the old kinship completed, not celebrated, not mourned, simply done. The obligation was honored, the community was served. The man returned to his place among his own. He gave more than he got. He considered that the correct arrangement, and he never asked anyone to remember his name for it. Eternal kinship. Remember who you are. Eternal kinship, because kin comes first.